This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 858 of Horse Tip Daily. A different horse tip, a different equine topic, a different equestrian expert every day. Horse Tip Daily brings the world of equine knowledge to you, one day at a time. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. Today's tip is an excerpt from thehorse.com's weekly horse health report on the Horses in the Morning show. The Hit'em crew is joined by thehorse.com digital editor Michelle Anderson and Sue McDonnell to talk about what the semi-feral ponies living at New Bolton Center can teach us about equine behavior without human influences. And we'll get right to our tip after this message from StatelineTack.com. When the weather forecast calls for wind, rain, bone-chilling temperatures, or snow, look no further than StatelineTack.com to make sure your barn time is warm, dry, and stylish. StatelineTack.com has jackets and vests that keep you warm and dry from afternoon hacks in New England to break of dawn schooling sessions in Wellington. They also carry a wide selection of toasty warm breeches for schooling ring or show ring. They even have waterproof breeches for those days when Mother Nature is at her worst. And StatelineTack.com knows there's nothing more satisfying than having warm, dry feet at the barn, so they have beautiful winter boots for showing, weather-busting paddock boots for on the horse or off, and lots of rubber boots for mucking about. Surf over to StatelineTack.com today and choose from your favorite brands like Ariat, Debonair, Dublin, Mountain Horse, Carrots, Tough Rider, and many, many more. StatelineTack.com.
That's right. It is time for thehorse.com and their weekly horse health report. And with us is Michelle Anderson, digital editor of thehorse.com. And Michelle, we have so many people listening to the show right now. I'm guessing I'm getting you. Say hello.
Yep.
Yes.
Good morning,
Woo!
Glenn.
Got the right one.
It's me.
I know your phone number now. So.
Oh, good. Oh, so you're ready for me, huh?
I'm ready. Yes, we're ready to go. Now, we're talking about, what exactly are we talking about today? I got the email, but I still wasn't quite sure.
Okay. So I was just at this ISIS conference that we talked about last weekend. It was in Delaware, right on the border with Pennsylvania. We spent some time at New Bolton Center at University of Pennsylvania, and there we got to see the semi-feral herd of ponies that Dr. Sue McDonnell's been researching for the past 20 years, and it was fascinating.
So they actually have them there at New Bolton Center?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they have a big pasture full of little ponies that, well, Sue will tell us more about it. Dr. McDonnell, are you with us?
How are you?
Good morning.
Oh, are you there, Dr. McDonnell?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good.
I'm here at New Bolton Center.
Good. So, yeah, I can't even explain these ponies, so I'm just going to start asking you questions, and you can tell us all about them. So, first off, let's start by having you tell everyone a little bit about what you do at New Bolton, because you're not a vet. You are a PhD who does research in behavior and helps with behavior in the vet school. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. I started here in the early 1980s as a graduate student studying reproductive behavior with focus in stallions and have never left. So I've filled many positions here in terms of teaching and research and clinical behavior, both reproductive behavior, so stallions with breeding difficulties, mares with reproduction-related performance problems, all sorts of clinical problems like that, as well as general behavior complaints or issues where it's not quite clear. Veterinarians are not able to quite figure out why there's been a behavior change, and they suspect that it may have a physical problem underlying. So a behaviorist can be very helpful in in looking at the behavior and advising on whether it's a learned problem or a simple management behavior problem, or whether they should keep looking for an underlying physical problem.
So,
and then the research that I do...
Let me clarify one thing. So that means that you were a doctoral student, and then all of a sudden your time was up, and they all looked around and said, she's still here and she won't leave. Let's get her ponies. That'll keep her busy for 20 years.
No, that's not exactly how it happened.
Just checking. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
But go ahead.
You did start out with just a couple of these ponies.
Well, my research in sexual behavior dysfunction actually led to many years of work for the National Institutes of Health using the stallion as a model for reproductive behavior in men. And so I had accumulated many ponies as research subjects for study of the physiology and pharmacology of all aspects of reproductive physiology in men. And that led into some questions that arose from some young students about the social behavior and interaction of horses under natural conditions, which the only way we could answer them was to actually create a small, which was only supposed to be a short-term project. That was in 1994. We turned out 13 males and 13 females to let them organize and breed under their own, as they wish, without any interruption or any help from us. And so that's how the herd actually started. And at that point, I got very fascinated with what we could learn from looking at horses living under natural social conditions every day of the year. There'd been quite a few studies where people went out to look at herds of horses, but they were limited by, the geography and the climate to maybe looking at them for a couple weeks at a time here and there, rather than to have long-term histories and knowing the parentage and how things went long-term. So that's what's kept us going for 20 years.
So
where did these ponies come from? Like, were they already feral ponies, or?
No, the original 26 animals were mostly purchased from a local stock auction here, where we were careful to get them from different parts of the country, hoping that they had no relatedness, so that we would start out with as much genetic diversity as possible. And most of them, to us, appeared to be ponies that had been bred that never handled, young animals that hadn't really had any introduction to domestic, but of course they came from domestic sources. So in this area at that time, there were quite a few people who would have backyard ponies. They'd have accidental offspring and not do much with them and send them to the meat auction here when they no longer could handle them. And so we took them from there. So some of them were fairly wild in our estimation.
So now, how many ponies has that left you with today?
Well, of course, we've had to have population control, because if you do the numbers, and they're very fertile, every mare has a foal beginning at age 2. So most of them have pregnant before their first birthday and foal before their second birthday, and they have a foal then consistent with breeding on foal heat every year thereafter. So if you do the math, we would have thousands by now, but we take out some each year, and we now have, we're at our maximum carrying capacity of just over 100.
Okay. And within those 100, how much space do they have?
They have approximately 35 to 40 acres of very good Chester County pasture, and they average 300 to 400 pounds. They're small Shetland type ponies. So in good years, for example, this year, which is a nice wet year, that grass will stay in good shape through the entire season, and then we give them grass hay that we spread out strategically so as not to disturb their social behavior. We feed in the winter the same sort of grass forage that they're eating during the growing season.
And so within that herd, how many groups do you have?
Right now we have 11 distinct groups and a couple new harem groups forming. It's the time of the year where new harem groups form. So, and there's a bit of a transition time where they kind of come and go from their natal band, but we'll probably in the fall settle out with 12 or 13 distinct groups. So that would be 10 harem groups, and we right now have what looks like are going to be 2 bachelor bands that are more or less cooperative when they need to be, but more or less separate when things are quiet.
I was watching the ponies, and they gave us a good show because they came right up to the fence while our group was there, and so we got to see all of them in action. But it reminded me of watching bees in a hive. Like, it was just nonstop action. Is that what they're like all the time?
Yes, they were actually a little bit sedate that day. It was a very hot afternoon, and so while they were initially inspired by all of our activity, they don't often have a couple tour buses and someone with a microphone. So that was their initial activity, was probably enhanced by that. But then it was generally quite quiet because it was so hot, and but they move a lot. That's one of the great findings we've had from this herd, is that they move as much as 100 miles a day. That would be mares, foals, and stallions at their busiest time of the year. And that's just their eating behavior and their social interaction. So when you have stallions and mares and youngsters, it keeps the activity going.
I have to tell you, Dr. McDonald, I went riding this weekend up in the mountains, and after about 7 miles, my big quarter horse was very tired. And I was like, dude, if these ponies can cover 100 miles a day, you can cover 10. You're going to make it. But it's definitely changed my perception on how much activity they really do need after seeing those little ponies going all the time, because mine just stand out there and eat and exercise, a few times a week. But so with the ponies, they came up to us and they were interested in people watching them. So what does semi-feral mean? Because the feral sounds wild to me.
Right. The term feral just means that animals that were of stock that was at one time domestic and now running free, which is all the remaining horses around the world. There are no truly wild horses that have never, that none of their ancestors were ever domestic. And so these ponies are feral, but they are contained and somewhat managed. So the term that behavioral biologists use for herds of animals like that, or groups of animals, is semi-feral, meaning we keep them as undisturbed as possible, but they are contained, and for example, these animals are supplemental fed over the winter just because they're not free to go on to greener pasture, to migrate to greener pastures. So we have to, supplement them with some grass hay.
Yeah. So do they receive any additional care?
They have some basic required vaccinations, although very interestingly, some of the vaccinations we have not proceeded onward with because, for example, West Nile virus moved into this area, and one thing that was very conspicuous about this herd is while our domestic horses in the area were succumbing to West Nile virus, and we were seeing cases in the hospital that in spite of 24/7 exposure to mosquitoes with West Nile virus, they were not becoming sick. And the question came up, should we vaccinate them? And I said, well, let's first take their titers and see where they are. And, of course, they had what are the amazing natural titers. When you get exposed naturally, you get very nice high titers. And so instead of vaccinating them now, we just follow the titers spring and fall. So they're, in essence, a sentinel herd for the amount of virus there is in the area that horses are being exposed to. But they otherwise get Eastern, Western encephalomyelitis vaccinations, tetanus and rabies. When they leave the herd, they get a Coggins test. We have very minimal parasite load in the herd, so we've gone to strategic deworming, and we rarely do they have any signs of parasites that would require deworming. They don't need teeth care or hoof care. We monitor that. We study that. But they do very well. When they're foraging off the ground, their teeth are in the proper orientation while they're chewing, and they don't have the problems that our domestic horses have when we feed them different types of forages and feed them up off the ground. They naturally wear their hooves and go through a natural trimming cycle. So they don't need hoof or dental care.
Do they clean their own paddock?
Anything else I missed?
Do they clean their own paddock? Do they clean their own paddock, their own field? Just asking.
Well, we don't seem to. Mother Nature seems to take care of that. In this environment, we seem to have enough precipitation that we don't get a really, an overload of fecal material that worries us. They use natural windbreaks and natural shelter. Depending on the weather conditions, they're standing in different places at different times, so that you don't get like you would if you had sheds where they're standing in one place and getting an accumulation, and that the substrate gets worrisome. So the substrate at any time, you could sit down and have a picnic just about anywhere and not worry that you're sitting in fecal material. We do get stud piles where the stallions have their little, where they defecate on one another's defecation, and there's an accumulation, and every stallion who passes stops and investigates and adds to the pile. But other than that, just about anywhere you could lay your picnic cloth down and open a bottle of wine and feel free that you weren't sitting in a mess.
I'm a horse husband, so you know what all of that just meant to me is, Jennifer, I don't have to clean the paddock anymore. That's what that means. I'm off the hook.
That is not what that means.
Dr. McDonald just said I don't have to do it.
I'm going to jump in for Jennifer. No, it means that you need a semi-feral herd of ponies on 40 acres running around. So you've mentioned, Dr. McDonald, some of the research that you've done on them. What kind of contributions have they offered the domestic horse?
Well, probably, I'm a reproductive behavior specialist, so probably the thing that stands out most for me is that it's really improved our understanding of reproductive behavior and the effect that males have on other males, the harem and bachelor effect. That's actually been embraced by the more progressive, even in the thoroughbred industry, where they need to still do natural covers, and so they require sustained libido of breeding stallions. The effects that we've been able to demonstrate of housing and exposure to mares to enhance their breeding potential and their fertility has probably been the greatest overall contribution in my mind. But there's just so many contributions they make here locally with our vet students who can see how healthy the animals are, and all the little things that get people thinking about how we could better manage horses under domestic conditions so as to keep them healthier, number one, more fertile, free of diseases, and a much better welfare. And it doesn't require that you have full natural social conditions, but you can often organize your farm in a way that kind of compromises, a nice compromise on efficiency of handling them and ease of handling them with providing them with the best social environment.
Yeah, and one thing that really fascinated me, and I live in the desert, so I don't see grass all that often, irrigated, but how green and lush your grass is there in Pennsylvania, but that the ponies don't have a history of laminitis, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and it's even more fascinating because this particular breed of small Shetland-type ponies are probably, most people would make a case that they are the greatest, of all the breeds, they are at the greatest risk of developing laminitis. And in fact, when they leave this herd, it's very sad because we have difficulty placing them with people who can keep them from having foundering within a year or two of leaving here. So I think having grown up under these conditions may even make them at greater risk. But we've not had any laminitis in the herd in all those years, and so it's just very conspicuously important that we look at all the factors that would protect these animals by being under these conditions.
Yeah. And so is there anything about the ponies that has surprised you as a researcher?
Oh, every day is a surprise. And one of the things, we when we first started, and I thought this would go for a couple years, and then after a couple years I had so many new insights into horse behavior, and I thought that, this is how it is, and this, you come up with, wow, I never realized this, and it's always this way. And then the next year you would find an exception to that. And so that's one of the inspirations for keeping it going, because while we're building on the knowledge and getting more and more confident in our observations that they hold true in other herds and that sort of thing, then sure enough, up comes an exception, which jogs your thinking again. So, every day is a surprise. And one great surprise that I'll share with you is how much they seem to communicate one with the other, even in events that are quite rare. For example, occasionally, we don't have many predators that would challenge the herd, but occasionally a domestic dog finds its way into the enclosure, and our fencing is such that they can sometimes find a little opening under the fencing and get in, but then they move on, and when they want to leave, they can't find another opening to get out. So under those conditions, it's really interesting how all the stallions will work together, the bachelors and the harem stallions, who generally don't like each other, don't seem to like each other very much. They will all collaborate in the way like you might have seen working dogs collaborate, and they will all go and help take care of getting this dog out of the enclosure. I feel really bad for the dog because you feel like it's going to be, pushed through the wire fence like a cheese slicer, but they will all get in formation, almost like a military formation, and double barrel kick towards the dog. And it's such a remarkable thing. And on the same lines, they will. Another very surprising thing of stallions was how much parenting behavior they do, and how when the youngsters start wandering away from home in play groups, as they often do at about 4 or 5 months of age, where different foals from different harem groups will go out and sort of play. Often a stallion, in fact, the stallion and harem stallions will take turns being the designated babysitter for the kindergarten, so to speak. And so seeing paternal behavior in stallions has been quite shocking at first, and it continues to surprise us and the students when they see it. They had no idea that stallions would be the primary parent, even though the foals still run home for a suck now and then. The stallion is the main parent.
And
that's fascinating. These ponies are so fascinating.
Is there somewhere online where we can follow them, or that you have more information on them?
We have a Behavior Lab website. If you just Google horse behavior, PENN, PENN, short for University of Pennsylvania, you should be able to get to our website, and we have our scientific publications posted and a few other tidbits. And also the Horse magazine, I write a column for them answering questions that from the public every month, or mostly every month. And if you look in their archives, many of the questions we find that we have comments concerning the natural horse behavior that help us answer those questions. So that's another good way to follow.
Very good. Well, thank you, Michelle, for bringing this to us today. Of course, Michelle is from thehorse.com. We really appreciate you being here every week, and what a fascinating topic. And you know how I love ponies, so...
and they're just like, the biggest question I got when I got back and started talking to my friends about the ponies is, how do I get a job doing that? How do I study ponies? Thank you. At
times in the past, I have owned a semi-feral herd of ponies, much to my wife's dismay. So thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
And that just about takes care of it. To listen to more of thehorse.com's tips, just go to horsetipdaily.com and look for the Experts drop-down menu on the left. If you love listening to the Horses in the Morning gang putting in their 2 cents on all things horse, you can tune in every weekday at horsesinthemorning.com for fascinating interviews, news stories from around the world, and clever contests and general horsey hijinks. You can have all of the Horse Radio Network shows with you wherever you go now with our new free app for iPhone and Android. Just go to your app store and search for Horse Radio Network. Don't forget to support our sponsors here on Horse Tip Daily because they really do make these podcasts possible. And this podcast has been brought to you through the generous support of StatelineTack.com. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.